Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Astrology Hub podcast. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the astrology of September. And I have one of the most beloved favorite astrologers here at Astrology Hub, Rick Levine, here to give us the read on the month ahead. And I just wanted to mention that he is our next Inner Circle astrologer teacher. So when he is teaching with us for this next lunar cycle, he's going to be going through the new and the full moon coming up, using slides, charts, a lot more instruction. So you're going to be learning why he's saying what he's saying when he's teaching with us for the Inner Circle.
And so we're busy.
And it's one of the reasons why we are opening up the Inner Circle and doing a back to school special right now, where you can get in for 50% off the regular price. You'll get in right in time for Rick's month and then continue with us if you want. So check that out at astrologyhub.com/join Inner Circle. And if you're even remotely curious, now would be the time to jump in and get this really intimate guidance from these great astrologers month after month. Rick, let's start with September. Tell us what we have ahead.
It is, and I think September, in some ways, it has a bit more continuity to what's been going on than either July or August had, because in July and August there were such strong events that had turning point energy. And I should say that we're recording this still early in August, but I can be pretty sure that when we look at this from the beginning of September, we're going to look back at August and it's going to have been as intense as the changes of July for a number of reasons that will become more and more evident, not only through August, but also into September itself. I mean, September has some outstanding events. It has the first of two eclipses. We're moving into eclipse season. And of course, that always carries its own level of intensity. It has more planets changing signs than we've seen recently, because Mercury is moving so fast right now, having come out of its retrograde. We have Mars and Mercury and Venus and the Sun all changing signs, along with Pluto backing up into Aquarius, backing up from Aquarius into Capricorn on the very first day of September. And so in September, we're going to be getting a whole lot of this kind of frenetic replay of everything that hasn't yet happened that was part of Pluto's moving through Capricorn. Remember, Pluto is a slow-moving, long-term cycle, and Pluto, in some ways, as it's moved through Capricorn, has created what Pluto does best, and that is deconstruction/reconstruction. You know, Pluto is kind of associated with death and rebirth, because it's not just the ending, it's the ending in order to create a new beginning. And remember, Pluto was moving from Capricorn into Aquarius around the time of the beginning of the United States of America. And so during these days, during these years of 2022, 3, 4, 5, we're kind of going through a death and rebirth of the United States itself. And, you know, it's like a Saturn return or a birthday that we celebrate when a planet comes around. And in some ways, as Pluto backs into Capricorn on September 1st, all of a sudden, the antenna is going to go up and say, for the last 15, 18 years, what has Pluto been destroying and deconstructing so we can remanufacture it and move into the future as it moves back into Aquarius, which it will do in December. So Capricorn is about structure. Capricorn is about fundamental structures, like banks, like bridges, like roads, like government itself. In fact, the rules of the land, the laws, the statutes are very Capricornian. Remember, Capricorn is Saturn's home sign, or one of Saturn's home signs. And as such, we look at the entire foundation of the United States of America being tested and being kind of going through this. How did we ever get to this place where we are now, where everything seems so unstable in a country where stability has largely been the rule of law? And it's important to understand that as Pluto moves back into Capricorn, it's going to be a reminder that it ain't over yet. There's still surprises to come between now and December 1st, including Election Day, where Pluto's retrogradation back into Capricorn is going to finish taking down what it needs to take down in order for its 20-year, 18-year run or so into Aquarius, where we now get to build things back up on a community level. Because remember, Aquarius is more futuristic, it's more technological, and it's more oriented towards community itself. And I don't want to degrade this conversation into just Pluto, but it's incredibly important because of what I think the most significant aspect of the month of September is. And it's really important to note that I think 9 out of 10 other astrologers out there in the world will not even notice this aspect because it's what I call a harmonic or a non-zodiacal aspect. And basically what I'm talking about is the half square between Saturn and Pluto. Now, we have such major aspects going on. In August, we had the first exact hit of Jupiter squaring Saturn. And remember, that goes back to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction back at the end of 2020 and all of 2024, but in particular, July, August, September, when this aspect is so close, because these are slow-moving aspects. We had Jupiter making its first square to Saturn, Jupiter expansive, Saturn contractive, and we're kind of seeing these deep social conflicts between these two different ways of looking at the progress of humanity, or at least in the United States itself. Now, that exact Jupiter-Saturn square was back on August 19th. But that's just the first of 3 of them, so we're still in play all the way through next mid-June. The dates right now are not as important. What is important is that Saturn is also making a half square to Pluto. Now, remember, it was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction and the Saturn-Pluto conjunction cycle that is maybe one of the most important architectural astrological cycles in the development of civilization itself. I mean, remember, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction was exact back in January of 2020, where we had the first reported COVID cases, and it was kind of the initiation of the, let's call it the craziness of whatever happened all through 2020 into 2021. But it was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction and oppositions that also were related to the World Trade Tower bombing in September of 2001. Also, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction is related to within a few days of the partition of India and its liberation from the British Empire, the beginning of World War I, actually the formation of the United Nations and Israel and the disappearance of Palestine. These are all related to the Saturn-Pluto cycle. So what we had back on May 6th of this year of 2024, we had Saturn making its first hard aspect back to Pluto, kind of looking at these boundaries, because Saturn is boundaries and Pluto is the breaking down of those boundaries. And through 2024, even going back to May, we had an escalation of what was going on in the Mideast as part of, a whole host of other events that are going on. But it's important to know that a half square, a semi-square, is not less powerful than a square. That's a mistake. It's like saying that a square is less powerful than an opposition. It's not. When you take an angle and you half it, it just makes it more exact and more precise. And so this half square between Saturn and Pluto happened for the first time back in May, but it's been with us really all the way through from March, April, May, June, July, August, now September, it's exact again because Saturn is retrograding back into a stationary, near stationary, but retrograding Pluto that has retrograded back into Capricorn. That's exact on September 25th. But this is not about September 25th. It's about the month in general. And when Saturn turns direct and then moves forward, it turns direct on November 15th. And when it then moves direct, it will make its third and final semi-square, half square to Pluto on January 26th, very close to the presidential inauguration here in the United States. So the battleground of what is the dividing line between this way of looking at things and that way of looking at things is still very, very, very much in play. And through September, we're going to see it come to a fevered pitch as we move through the month. So those are some of the most important things as we look ahead. We can certainly break down and look at some of the more individual things as we move through the month.
Rick, it was one of the things that I was marveling about. I actually watched your August mid-month report several times. And one of the things that I was thinking about is, and then we have Pluto coming into this mix. And you did mention it in that report, even though we were talking really mainly about mid-August. When Pluto is making its final dip back into Capricorn.
Yes.
I know I hear things like its final destruction of structures and things that need to be. It's like the final say, I guess, of Pluto in Capricorn. Is there anything else about the fact that it's the last one, and then also the second or third time it's going back into Aquarius?
I look at these retrogrades back into Capricorn. It's only Pluto and Neptune that will at times go over a point instead of like just direct, retrograde, direct.
Yeah.
It'll go over a point, direct, retrograde, direct, retrograde, direct. So it'll make it last for a longer period of time. In this case, we're looking at, a 2, almost 3-year period of Pluto moving back and forth between Capricorn and Aquarius. By the way, we're going to get that same phenomenon with Neptune that is right now at the 29th, the last degree, not only of Pisces, but the last degree of the zodiac. And it's going to tip into Aries in 2025 and then back into Pisces and back. So it's doing that same back and forth thing. Now, I look at this as when a planet like Pluto or any of the slow moving planets dip back into the previous sign, it's almost like a remedial class. Let's make believe you're in second grade and you didn't quite get the reading thing down. Now, they say, we're going to advance you into third grade, but we're going to make you take a class in remedial reading because you can't go ahead until you learn this particular thing.
Wow.
And in a way, it's almost like these Plutos dipping back into Capricorn. This will be the second time it'll dip back into Capricorn. And as you say, the final time it'll dip back into Capricorn. Pluto won't be back in Capricorn again for some 215, 20 years. Now, what that means is that whatever it is we didn't get right, whatever job we didn't finish, whatever it is that needs to be attended to, whatever we did wrong in breaking down what we were breaking down, this is our chance to get it right. Because when Pluto moves back into Aquarius in December, and Pluto actually, moves into Aquarius. No, I don't have the date in front of me. But it's in early December. And when it does that, in a way, it's done with its destructive aspect of the structures. And instead now it's beginning to look at what is it that over a couple of decades I can break down in our assumptions about how we all relate to each other rather than to the fundamental rules and laws. And I think that we will in some way see a shift of consciousness, and it will take a year or two or three for this to settle in. I mean, like many other astrologers, I've been talking about Pluto in Aquarius and the technology and the AI or ASI, artificial super intelligence, or the ET aspect of it, and all these kind of futuristic things. But the other aspect of it is, how do I as an individual relate to the larger community? And we've seen resistance around this in the framing of the concept of globalism. Now, what we're going to be seeing is a restructuring of the way the community, the interaction, the network. That's a good Aquarius word. It's the network. And of course, in computer terminology, the power of the network is not in any one node. The power of the network is in the number of connections. And that is what's going to be important. And we're going to see a shift in that zeitgeist. And in fact, on September 1st, we're getting, and we're really getting a flavor of this at the very end of August that we may have talked about. I certainly covered this in my separate YouTube, August piece, and will again, as we talk about it now. But as we move into September, Venus is moving from Virgo into Libra, and Pluto is moving from Aquarius back into Capricorn. What that means is that Venus will be making a trine with Pluto from, let's say, from either late Virgo to late Capricorn, or very early Libra to very early Aquarius. Over those days, they both shift. Both Venus and Pluto shift signs. At the same time, we have Uranus at very late degrees of Taurus. And so we're getting this grand trine in the sky between Pluto, Uranus, and Venus that is being even encouraged by the fact that Neptune, at the very last degree of Pisces, is playing into this. And I think this is the beginning of a sense of more ease about what it is that we're moving into over the future. Look, for many people, and it doesn't matter what side of any individual issue you stand on. I mean, there are probably, 3, 5, 8, 15 different issues out there that we can take sides on. And whatever side we take on, it's a me against everyone else or us against them. But I think what we're going to see as we move into September, we're going to begin to get inklings that there may be a larger, not a larger way of how we look at things, but there's a larger way of what we look at as we see the goals off in the distant future that may enable some of us with very different perspectives to actually go back to something which has kind of been a binding piece of this country for a long time. And that is, even when you disagree with someone, you come to some place that may be neither what I want nor what you want, except it's a place where we can agree, where we may be able to get to a place where we both want to get to. And I'm seeing that kind of feeding what's going on. That doesn't mean that the conflicts are going to go away. It doesn't mean that the complications are going away. It doesn't mean that the Jupiter-Saturn square is going to go away. There's still this push, pull, expand, contract. I mean, Jupiter in some ways is about progression and liberalism. It's open, it's big, it's blue, and Saturn in some ways is about constriction, conservatism. It's about status quo. It's about holding on to what you think the structure is. And in some ways, we're seeing this push-pull energy of this Jupiter-Saturn square. I mean, it's been around for a while. It's certainly been around forever. It's one of the things that drives our society forward. But into this, we're now also seeing the Saturn half square Pluto. And even though we're getting some sense of ease, a change in the zeitgeist where there are some people riding a wave of, we may be able to make something work here. We may be able to find our way back to the center. I'm not saying we can or we will, but that energy is feeding September.
Well, Rick, I'm sure people would agree there's a lot more people who are having a hard time tolerating the continual division and fighting and inability to see any other perspective than their own. So I can see what you're saying, that it's not really clear how we would come to a resolution, but it seems like to me, there's more people wanting some level of resolution.
Right. And Amanda, don't read me wrong. I'm not saying there's going to be resolution. Right. No. I'm just saying that there's going to be, in some subtle ways, a working through this kind of crazy place that we've been in, maybe since the Uranus-Pluto square. Remember, that's the deepest rhythm here. The Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the mid-1960s set a tone of this explosion, Uranus, of the deeply rooted, hidden stuff that would be Pluto that exploded into culture in the mid-60s. In the 2010s, what happened is that Uranus made a 90-degree angle to Pluto that was exact 2012 to 2015, 7 times because of their slow-moving back and forthness, their retrograde process. But that was the height, of the craziness of Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street and the gender realignment, so to speak, the legalization of gay marriage and of widespread legalization of use of recreational drugs or medicinal drugs, things of that sort. That all happened in that square period of time where there was still a lot of conflict between Uranus breakthrough and Pluto blow it all up slowly, but transform it, destroy it. We're coming into a period of several years where Uranus is now within range, but it's not exact. It's not exact. Really, for the first time, the Uranus trine to Pluto is not really exact until 2025, 2026, 2027. And yet right now, even today, on September 1st, Uranus is at 27 degrees of Taurus, and Pluto is just backed up into the very end, let's say 29 degrees of Capricorn. They're within a couple of degrees of being trine. And so we're getting this sense of this deeper communication between the radical, rebellious upheaval and the bring it down so we can make something new. And I think that we'll see over the next few years, these planets working together in some way that doesn't make the bifurcation, the polarity go away, but it makes it so that we're moving through it rather than just having 90-degree angle square blocks. Now, remember, we still got the Jupiter square Saturn that was exact for the first of 3 times back in August, and that's going to be with us through September. So it's not like it's a done deal, but there's something subtle that's cooking and building. There's a wave in the zeitgeist that's giving us a sense of hope, a sense of potential, a sense of possibility. And who the hell knows? I mean, I'm tired of telling people I'm an astrologer. I'm not a damn prophet. What's going to happen in the election? I'll tell you, maybe in mid-November, but I don't know. It's a pretty crazy period of time.
Okay, Rick, I have a question about Pluto. Pluto is destruction and rebirth. We've been going.
You don't get one without the other.
Okay. And we've been doing the whole destroy thing through Capricorn structures and everything for many, many years, since 2008, right? And then now we're doing the final destruction when Pluto goes back into Capricorn. When's the rebirth? And does the rebirth happen? So as Pluto moves into Aquarius, it's going to start destroying the Aquarius stuff. Is that when the rebirth on the Capricorn things happen?
Yeah. And I think destruction is a bit of it doesn't have quite destruction is different than deconstruction.
Ah, okay.
And it still is. There needs to be a destruction, a bringing down of structure in order for a new structure to take shape.
Right.
And that is an ongoing and continual process. When Uranus is involved in a destruction, it's like an earthquake or a lightning striking or an explosion or like a Mars-Uranus conjunction, an apparent attempted assassination of a former president. That's a Uranus destruction or near destruction. I mean, it's still an event that like has that Uranian suddenness. With Pluto's destruction, the best way I can describe it is think of a glacier destroying a mountain. It doesn't look like anything's happening day to day, week to week, month to month, even year to year. The glacier maybe moves a half of an inch a year. And so when does the destruction occur and when is it over? It's a gradual process that's a metamorphosis. When does the caterpillar become a butterfly? Well, on some level, it's when it breaks free of the cocoon. But on another level, it's when it gets into the cocoon, because there's something there that's already in process. And even before it breaks free and we see it, it's already made its transformation, but it's still encased in something. And so I don't think there's a single point here. This is and this is the hardest thing to understand about Pluto and any unconscious process. Because remember, to the ancients, Pluto was underground. Pluto is the lord of the underworld, which was underground. Remember, a plutocracy, which our government is a plutocracy, it's a government of the very, very, very wealthy that have hidden wealth. It's not the people who have a lot of cash in the bank. It's the people who own the hidden wealth. And of course, historically, that would be the people who owned the gold mines, the diamond mines, the copper mines, the silver mines, and then the oil all underground. This is the real wealth. So Pluto is the underground, but it was the brilliant post-Jungian psychologist James Hillman who, in his book, The Dream and the Underworld, very clearly describes how the underworld, psychologically, is everything that we don't see on the surface. In fact, everything that is unconscious is Plutonic. That is the realm of Pluto. And one of the things we're going to be talking about in the Inner Circle in the Mercury Mastery class is how Mercury was basically sent to rescue Persephone from the underworld, because Mercury is the only god that can go back and forth into the underworld unscathed, not lose its memory and come back here. And this is why we have talk therapy. It's just Mercury going into the underworld, bringing things back into the light so we can then process and work with it. But there's no one single moment of change in the unconscious. It's gradual. There's no destruction. It's metamorphosis, because one thing metamorphosizes into something else. And it has to do that by taking apart the structure that held the old thing together. But it's not necessarily a Uranian explosion. Now, Uranus is still active in all of this, but when we talk about Pluto, it has to be that gradual process. And I think about when a client is going through a Plutonic transit, like let's say someone who has their sun or moon or a planet at 28 or 29 degrees of Capricorn or 0 or 1 degree of Aquarius, and Pluto is coming around in that once every 250, 248 year movement. It's like surfing on the edge of a glacier. If the damn thing was moving a lot faster, we could keep our balance like we do on a skateboard or on a surfboard, because waves move fast enough that we know that we're always in that process of maintaining balance. And the danger of surfing a Pluto wave is we forget that something's changing.
Okay.
So what happens is, as soon as we freeze and think that we don't have any movement that we need to maintain, the glacier thinks we're a tree and it just takes us out. So that's the underlying image that I have of how you work with the Pluto transit. We'll talk more about that, and in the Inner Circle, because it's Mercury's job to actually keep that communication process going between what was previously hidden, what we're making visible, and what we can do with it once it becomes visible. That is talk therapy.
I love it. Okay. We have some eclipses in September or one
We have some eclipses. We have some eclipses in autumn.
in autumn. Yes.
In the northern hemisphere. In the southern
Yes.
hemisphere,
Yes.
obviously, it's in spring.
Yes.
Yeah, where eclipses come in pairs. Sometimes there's three of them, but we do have eclipses coming up. We have the first of the two. So let's actually back up a second and also note that as we move into the month of September, the moon is at the very end of Leo. And by September 2nd, as the moon moves into Virgo, where the sun is in Virgo, we have our new moon on the very beginning of the month. We have our the new moon on September 2nd, and it's actually 6:55 p.m. We'll be doing a special Inner Circle talk about that. I don't want to dive too deeply into that, with one exception, and that is that Mercury, we're back to Mercury, still at the end, having retrograded all the way back into Leo. Mercury is going to be making a trine with Chiron. And I think that this can be something that's very, very important, because at the same time, the new moon is making a square and a half with Chiron. Mercury is giving us a way to talk our way through it. So hopefully by the beginning of September, we will be able to use our language in a way to affect some of the beginnings of healing. Now, it's not a completely done deal, because at the new moon, we also have Mars squaring Neptune, and there's a bit of confusion. We may be shadow boxing, or we may be taking a punch at the wrong person. And I don't mean that physically. I can certainly, that certainly can be metaphysical, meaning verbal, because Mars is at the end of Gemini. But Mars moves out of Gemini and into Cancer on September 4th. This is huge, and it's really important to understand that in traditional astrology, Mars in Cancer is in its exile, meaning that it's as far away, well, it's really in its fall is the technical word, because Mars, when it's not in its home sign of Aries, its favorite place to be is in Capricorn, because it gets shit done. It finishes what it starts. And when Mars moves into Cancer, it's as far away from its exaltation as it gets. So in traditional astrology, Mars in Cancer is kind of harder to work with. It's harder to find a place to work with. But I think it's really important to understand that in the patriarchal origins of astrology, we have some inherent judgments that come from a male perception of what Mars should be: macho, feisty, fiery, conquering new territory, taking things away from the weaker, pushing forward. And Mars in Cancer is not interested in doing that at all. And so I think we will see through September and on into October, as Mars is moving through Cancer, I think we will see a new round of self-protectionism, a round of how are we going to take care of ourselves, our homes, our family, our personal lives, rather than talking about all these things that are out there with Mars having been in Gemini. And then when we get to September 6th, we have a very important little date. We'll get back to the eclipses really quickly here, but I just want to take us through some of the highlights, because on September 6th, Mars moving direct is now back around 27 degrees of Leo, heading back toward Virgo. Remember, Mars moved into Virgo, turned retrograde back into Leo, and now it's moving in the first week of September. It's moving back into Virgo. It does that on September 8th. But on September 6th, Mercury makes a square to Uranus. Now we're talking about the lightning striking and the sudden changes. And when Mercury makes a square to Uranus, often things are said that are surprising. Things happen, Uranus, that are electrical. We're back to the network. We're back to the electricity and the lightning striking. And when Mercury squared Uranus, remember, it's done that 3 times. The first time was back on July 21st, when President Biden basically made his announcement and passed the torch of power from the Democratic Party to someone else, to Kamala Harris. And also well, it was just a few percent of the internet that went out, but we have a good case study for how a small mathematical percentage can affect such a dramatically large number of people, because it was only, I think I saw the statistic of 0.5% of those window users in the world that had a problem with the CrowdStrike security protection upgrade that brought so much governmental and airline stuff, and that just stopped the world for a few hours on some level. And that happened on July 21st, the first of 3 times. The second time happened mid-August, and we're recording this before then, so I don't know what or how that will play out, but I wouldn't be surprised if that mid-August period of time, really from the 14th to the 19th, 20th, we've talked about that period as many other astrologers have, but the exact retrograde Mercury square Uranus is on August 18th. And then the third and final one is on September 6th. So that's the electric, sudden, something very different than Pluto, which has that slow, dramatic movement to it. And that takes us up through the first week of September, at Mercury moving into Virgo on the 8th. On the 12th, we have the Sun making a square to Jupiter. Here we see some false confidence. We see some optimism. Hope comes in. But I always think of Tim Leary's book, Confessions of a Hope Fiend. Hope is a mixed blessing, because it puts the movement or the potential for solution out into the future. And sometimes if we get so lost in hope, we don't do anything in the present moment. But there is that kind of optimism and confidence that comes through on September 12th, 13th, even into the 14th, when Venus moves into a trine with Jupiter. We're getting that Jupiterian expansive confidence. But then on the 17th, Mercury makes a 2.5 with Pluto. We're back to that 8th harmonic, half square, 2.5. But with Mercury making a 2.5 with Pluto, we have something with the hidden power structure. The Mercury Pluto stuff has been consistently tied to, power struggle, some of the conflicts that we've seen explode in relationship to the genocide and or Mideast issues, going even back to the October 7th. Was that the date of the? That period of time there. That was Pluto's involvement. And so we may see some things tripping up right around here. And that then plays right into the first of the 2 eclipses, because the exact eclipse is the full moon is on the 17th. And on the 17th, we have a full moon eclipse, and the full moon is at 25 degrees of Pisces. And we have the nodal axis, which is in early Aries Libra. And whenever there's a new moon or full moon close to the nodal axis, this is within 11 degrees of that axis, that's when we get an eclipse. It means that the moon going around the Earth is in the same plane as the Earth going around the sun. And so they appear to line up in the sky, and the shadow of the full moon basically is created, or the shadow of the Earth on the full moon is created so it looks like the moon kind of goes out or becomes dimmer at its moment of fullness. And this full moon is important. It's a powerful one, because it has so much dynamic energy tied up into it. And we're not going to drill down too deeply into the full moon eclipse chart of the full moon. But the important thing to understand about this full moon chart is how close the Saturn half square to Pluto is. Remember, we already talked about that. That Saturn half square to Pluto is not exact until the 25th. So we're still a week away from it. But it is on the day of the full moon eclipse. That half square between Saturn and Pluto is less than a half a degree of exact. And so the eclipse itself, which releases energy, it forces us to let go of the past. The eclipse is very close to a conjunction with Neptune, because the eclipse itself, I don't know if I gave this figure yet, or this data, but the eclipse itself is at 7:34 p.m. And that specific time on September 17th. And it's at 25 degrees 41 minutes of Pisces, meaning the moon is almost at 26 degrees of Pisces. Neptune is at 28.5 degrees of Pisces. So this eclipse is kind of involving Neptune. The moon joins up with Neptune just a few hours after the eclipse, and the sun opposes Neptune just a couple days later, actually on the 20th. And so there's this whole sense of fantasy, illusion, dream that's part of the eclipse at the same time that Mercury is opposite Saturn. That's a reality check. Mercury, mental, Saturn, real, while Mercury and Saturn are making half squares and square and a halves with Pluto. So we're getting this dynamic energy on the eclipse, on the full moon eclipse on the 17th, that involves not just the moon opposed the sun, that's a full moon, not just the full moon on the nodal axis, but also Mercury opposing Saturn, that's the reality check, and also Venus opposing Chiron, which has to do with the awareness of where we hurt and what might feel good and what we can do to resolve that. But the resolution here is still a bit out in the distance. I mean, it's not easily graspable, but it's there. This eclipse is incredibly powerful. And like I said, we'll drill deeper down into this when we do the full moon and what we can do to work with it and the ceremony and stuff. But it's a very powerful eclipse. And it's the first of two eclipses. The second eclipse actually occurs on October 2nd. That's the new moon eclipse. That is, it's very close to the nodal axis. It's just 4 degrees to the nodal axis. And this total eclipse of the sun is, I know by contract I'm not allowed to talk about October. But this eclipse, interestingly enough, has a lot of very powerful movement to it. And there's a grand trine in the sky in water that gives us some emotional fluidity that we'll talk about toward the end of September. And the October Inner Circle guide, I'm sure, will drill down on this. Yeah, eclipse season is always dynamic changes. The thing to remember about eclipses is that they're temporally, meaning time, weird. That they're weird in as much as they seem to be portals or vortexes, openings, but they happen both in the past and in the future. It's not unusual for an eclipse to precipitate of an event that happens weeks or even months before and after it occurs. So even though eclipses themselves, technically, eclipse season, it begins on the full moon of September 17th and ends on the new moon of October 2nd. Technically, we're already within that world of the craziness occurring from those eclipses.
Rick, we had some really potent eclipses in March, April of 2024.
We did. March 25th and April 8th were the two eclipses that brought about a whole lot of change back then. Go ahead.
Yes. Now, how are these eclipses related or not related to whatever was happening then?
Well, we're at a point where the nodal axis is going to retrograde, because the nodal axis retrogrades from Aries and Libra back into Pisces and Virgo. And although that doesn't occur, it actually doesn't occur until early next year, we're getting a kind of an early warning sense of that, because these two eclipses that are occurring, the September 17th eclipse is actually occurring in Pisces. That's the opposition. The sun is in Pisces. And so that eclipse is occurring almost as an early warning of what might be over the next year and a half as the nodes back up into, into Virgo Pisces. And I said the moon will be in Pisces and the sun will be in Virgo at that eclipse. But interestingly enough, at the October 2nd eclipse, that eclipse is going to be the new moon in Libra, which is back on the Libra Aries. And so we're not done with the fire sign eclipses. And so there may be some jumping back, to the energy of earlier this year. But this eclipse season is a dynamic change because there's a deeper change going on as the nodes are ready to shift signs.
And are either one of those eclipses fully visible? Is the October 2nd one?
Well, the October 2nd one as a solar eclipse, it's not visible here. I don't have a chart of what the path is, but I'm sure it's not visible. I say here, I mean in Seattle. Okay. It's not visible in Washington. Solar eclipses have very narrow paths. The lunar eclipse, typically lunar eclipses are visible all over the planet if it's nighttime when the eclipse occurs, because the full moon has to be out. And that isn't always true, but typically the full moon eclipses are visible to a much wider group of people.
Okay. And I want to ask you this because I'm just curious about your answer. I don't think I've ever asked you this. There was a lot of debate in April about whether or not it's a good idea to look at an eclipse, whether or not it's a good idea to be out under an eclipse. Do you have experience with that? Do you have an opinion on that?
I have experience and opinion, and yet both experience and opinions are not necessarily truth.
Well, that's true. But I'm just curious about yours.
I've been under, I've visibly watched 3 solar eclipses, total eclipses. And I've visibly watched numbers. I mean, 8, 10, 12 lunar eclipses. And I can't honestly say that I have anything that has been terrible that I can in any way associate with any of those experiences. That's the one experience. The other experience is that I gave a lecture at the Krishnamurti Institute for Vedic Studies in Calcutta, India, a number of years ago. And my half-hour plenary session talk at this conference was at the moment of totality of a lunar eclipse. And in the Indian Vedic tradition, eclipses are bad. Or should say they are difficult, and it is not wise to go out under the eclipse. However, there were a number of Westerners there, and they were, of course, not at my lecture. They were all out looking at the full moon being eclipsed. But I got to that point, and I had my cell phone alarm set for 1.5 minutes prior to the eclipse. And I'm giving this half-hour lecture, and my alarm on my phone goes off, and I say, I need to stop and just make sure that we are all aware of the fact, because we are astrologers and we do pay attention to what goes on up there, that we are now 1 minute away from an exact lunar eclipse. And I would just like to honor and respect that moment. And I took my flute out and I played the flute for about 1.5 minutes in the middle of this lecture. And then I put the flute away and I went back to the lecture and picked up where I was. And I would say that most of the Indians in the room were horrified.
Horrified that you played your flute. Okay.
That I acknowledged the eclipse and didn't put on sunglasses and a Faraday cage, aluminum shielding, and whatever else. No, my sense is that eclipses can alter the polarity. Let's say you're in a room and the lights have been gradually going out for 2 weeks. I mean, like there's the slider on your light that's the that's the dimmer.
Yes.
And let's say that you have intense lighting in your room, and for over a 2-week period, someone has been moving that slider oh so slowly until at the end of 2 weeks the light is out. And then in absolute absence of light, all of a sudden that person takes that switch and goes blip, 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 flipping it back and forth, from light to dark to light to dark. You might have an epileptic fit because of the shock of the gradual to the on to the off. And so eclipses do rattle our nervous system. But is that bad? Well, it may be if you're trying to just keep a status quo of nothing is changing and everything is going forward. It may be if you have a whole lot of stuff that you've over 2 weeks or over a lifetime have been trying to put into the dark, and all of a sudden the lights come on. And the same is true with the solar eclipse, where all of a sudden the light goes off and all you have is what's in the shadow. All you have is what's in the unconscious that all of a sudden screams forward and then goes away again. And so eclipses can be upsetting. They can be a bit crazy making, but is that bad? And the answer is, I don't know. I think that, to quote, Dune, Frank Herbert wrote, fear is the mind killer. It's the fear, as I have written, the fear of the fall is the fate that we seal. So the answer is, I don't know. My experience is no. I would rather engage the energy. I would rather confront the demons. I would rather see what's in the unconscious. I would rather work with the energy rather than pushing them away. And yet I know there are people who feel very differently, and that's their prerogative.
Okay. Well, Rick, is there anything else you want to share with us about September?
Yes, there is one other date I want to mention. But before I do that, I think it's also important to understand there's so many planetary sign changes, and I mentioned the Mars moving into Cancer on September 4th. I mentioned the Mercury moving into Virgo on September 8th, but Mercury is moving so fast that by the 26th, it moves into Libra. And when Mercury changes from Virgo into Libra, it actually brings about a bunch of stuff, because Mercury, as it moves from Virgo, from 29 degrees of Virgo into 0 degrees of Libra, it's going to trine Pluto, because Pluto is now back at 29 degrees of Capricorn. And that Mercury is going to be very potent because it will also oppose Neptune. Now, it does that on the 25th and 26th. The Mercury opposes Neptune, trines Pluto on the 25th, and then moves into Libra on the 26th. Why is this so significant? Because we have on the 25th, as I said earlier, we have the second of 3 exact semi-squares between Saturn and Pluto. Now, remember, these Saturn-Pluto events are so intense and so profound and so important that they take triggers to manifest. It's not about the day. It's not about September 25th. Except on September 25th, when Saturn is half squaring Pluto, Mercury is going to be trining Pluto, bringing up the awareness of and the ability to speak about what is in the unconscious, even though it's going to be motivatingly conflictive and engaging the boundary of Saturn, because Mercury is trining Pluto, but Pluto is in a half square with Saturn. So even though we're talking about it, and that Mercury, as it's moving from Virgo into Libra, it's going to make a trine with Uranus on the 24th, a trine with Pluto on the 25th, and oppose Neptune also on the 25th, making a grand trine with Neptune at the kite point, at the opposition point. And again, we can drill down further on this, but this is an incredible amount of flow of energy that is in practical Earth sign. This is Mercury still in Mercury still in Virgo, trining Pluto in Capricorn, trining Uranus in Taurus. And not only on the 25th does Saturn make that half square with Pluto, the second of three half squares that we already talked about, the first back in May and the third and final one at the end of January of 2025. On the exact same day, Mars, having moved into self-protective Cancer, is going to be making an exact half square with explosive, radical, rebellious, ingenious breakthrough Uranus. On the exact same day, we have a trigger event. What's going to happen on that day? Well, again, maybe nothing, but most likely something over those 2 or 3 days of the 24th, 5th, 6th. There's just too much astrological energy building up. And so although we have an eclipse the week before, although we have numbers of other important events earlier in the month, I think that September is going to be in some way going out. I was going to say go out with a bang. Let me just say go. But I don't necessarily mean a gunshot. Yeah. I think it's important to understand that it's going to go out with an energetic something. So that to me there, is those are the most important things of September. I don't think September is quite on the same level as July and August. And yet it's playing off of those events, which are obviously not going to crescendo until a combination of November election day and January inauguration and what follows from that, because we are in a larger process than any one event. And as you know, from my astrology practice in general, it's whenever we take a specific single aspect or a specific single astrological event and try to analyze it, we lose sense of what's really happening, because as Bucky Fuller said, the whole is not greater than the sum of the parts. The whole is unpredictable from the sum of the parts. And we're looking at all these different pieces as part of a process that, again, goes back forever, but it goes back in most modern times to the changes that went on in the mid-60s with the Uranus-Pluto square, now moving into the Uranus-Pluto trine over the next few years, and the Saturn-Pluto opposition in the mid-60s that then became the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 1982, when incidentally Israel invaded Lebanon, when England was at war with Argentina over the Falkland Islands. There was many other stuff going on at that point in time also. So we're looking at this larger flow of events that in some ways is bringing in the change of the zeitgeist, the radical revolution of the 1960s, of the actual shift into the Uranian future. We're looking at also I think in some ways, what I'm going to call on a much larger scale, that may take decades and maybe even a century as we move further into the age of Aquarius, and that will be the downfall of capitalism and colonialism, which have basically been with us in some ways for at least a half a dozen centuries or so. So these are big changes, and we are little pieces along the way. And so, that's my current view of September.
Amazing. Okay. Well, we're in the midst of this really incredible astrology. It just keeps unfolding month after month. I'm waiting for the month where it's like, well, this is going to be a little bit of a break. It's like, it doesn't seem like we have that coming anytime soon.
No, but we get a little sense of that in September. I mean, even toward the end of October with those grand trines coming in, we're getting inklings of it. And it's the first inklings that we've had in a while of any sense of potential, settling of the energy, even though there's no direct path to it yet. And I think that we're going to get this on successive waves, even though there can be building conflict and building dissension, that we're going to get this on successive waves through 2025 and 2026.
Okay, good. All right. If you're the kind of person who would benefit from structure around these forecasts, visuals, charts, some more actual teaching on the interpretation and why certain things are interpreted certain ways. And if you love learning from great astrologers like Rick Levine.
And what we can do to work with them. We can't change the structures, but we can change how we work with them by knowing what they are. That word is theurgy. The ancients said that was one of the 3 alchemical processes, and that's working with God.
Ah, love that so much. And that is a huge part of the inner circle, that we're not just kind of doing a forensic on the astrology, we're actually actively engaging with it in our lives. And the astrologers give embodiment practices, soul work assignments. They bring in music to help us connect with it on different levels. There's all kinds of amazing things that happen that help you take astrology from a theoretical understanding into your body and then into your life, so that you can use it as a tool to work with God, like Rick just said.
Theurgy. Ergy is when you get an urge, but an erg is a unit of energy that has to do with an erg is how much energy is expended. And thea comes from theos, like theology. Theurgy is working with God.
I love it so much. Okay. So right now we have the opportunity for you to get into the inner circle at our back to school 50% off pricing. You'll join just in time to go way, way deeper with Rick Levine. We have Steve Judd coming up here soon. We have Mark Borax. We have Andrea Michelle Kennedy. We have Cassandra Butler and just amazing astrologers coming.
That's a pretty cool group. I like to be in that group.
Exactly. And then you get premium podcast content from Christopher Renstrom every single week. I mean, it is an immersion, and you can partake in any aspects of it that you want. When you have busy months, it's okay. It's all recorded. It's there for you. When you can join the things live and really engage, it's there for you. You have an opportunity to get your chart read by Rick during the live Q&A and chart reading demonstration he'll do on his mastery class technique. So there's all kinds of amazing things, and you just get to immerse yourself in this incredible community of astrology lovers and astrology teachers. So go to astrologyhub.com/join inner circle to learn more. You have until August 31st to take advantage of our back to school special. Rick, is there anything else you want to leave us with before we close out?
Think cosmically, act locally.
Yes.
Doesn't do any good to do astrology unless you apply it every moment in your life. And that doesn't mean applying it by knowing what the current aspect is or where the moon is. It means taking all those things that you learn on the spiritual or cosmic path that you may be on and doing things that have to do with giving a helping hand to someone, going out of the way, showing compassion, being open, listening, not having all the answers, but having questions. Think cosmically, act locally.
Love it.
I'm a broken record.
Yes, it's perfect though. That's the way, that's how we'll absorb it. The more you say it, the more we absorb it. And actually that does happen to me with that saying of yours. The more years I've heard you say it, the more it makes sense and the more I understand it truly. So, okay, everybody, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of our community. Thank you for tuning into this podcast episode. Thank you for making astrology a part of your life. I can't wait to see you on the next episode and hopefully in the inner circle as well. Take care, everyone.